Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the Real Life Podcast. Today I'm going to be reviewing a number of recent films that are beginning to come out on streaming platforms. I want to do them still in the cinema. I want to set a bit of a precedent that I will be doing current films as they come out as well and reviews for those, not just talking about, films throughout history or topics from the past. I wanted to keep this current as well and make sure that I'm covering all the newest films as well. For example, I'm very excited for the film Men with Jessie Buckley and Rory Kinnear. That looks like it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm very excited to go and see that. But for this, we're going to cover 5 films that I saw relatively recently in the cinema that are still relevant and worth talking about. And these 5 are Top Gun Maverick, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, Operation Mincemeat, The Northman, and, brace yourselves, a Morbius review is going to be the final part of this podcast. I may lose my mind halfway through that one, so feel free to switch off. I'm not going to be doing Fantastic Beasts in this podcast. I have seen it, but I think it'll fit better into a discussion or a podcast about the trilogy itself as a whole, maybe perhaps as a Wizarding World as a whole. But there is a warning now, definitely going to be spoilers in all of these, so if you haven't seen them, maybe hold off listening to this until you have, or if you don't mind a couple of bits and pieces being spoiled for you, have a listen to this and, might be a recommendation for you, and then go and see it and make up your mind yourself. So, that's the order of today, and without further ado, let's get into Top Gun Maverick. Okay, so Top Gun Maverick, directed by Joseph Kosinski, who did films like Oblivion and Tron Legacy, and written by a large team, Aaron Kruger, Eric Warren Singer, Christopher McQuarrie, and the story was done by Peter Craig and Justin Marks. He tells the story of Maverick's return to Top Gun as a teacher after the first film, instructing the US's best pilots on a very, very dangerous mission to destroy some uranium in a particularly difficult area to navigate using planes. Val Kilmer's Iceman picks him specifically to come back and teach. However, Maverick is faced with the difficult prospect of teaching Goose's son, callsign Rooster, Bradshaw, who's played by Miles Teller, and the mission involves severe difficulty, which is why the training is necessary. So, it stars Tom Cruise and Miles Teller and Jennifer Connelly and a host of other brilliant performances. Don't hate me. This is better than the first Top Gun. And I know that might actually cause a bit of upset across the place, but from where I'm sitting, it actually tops it. Because in Top Gun, the story, for me, fell absolutely below, flying. Whereas in this film, the film is without a doubt asking you to care about the people and the story and their arc and their journey. And I think that's down to writing, but also directing. I mean, the shots of the pilots off the plane when they're just in the hangar or in a lesson feel very similar to that of them in the cockpit. There's a lot of straight-on shots of, just essentially their upper body, which makes you, kind of feel as if they are the same people in and out of the plane, and that's definitely echoed in their characters. It makes their journey feel a bit more sort of connected between the two worlds, and you're introduced to the people to get a good sense of their character from essentially the first scene in the pub. And interestingly, most notably for me, in that scene, you get a really good sense of Bob's character, who is perhaps not the most notable part of the film, but actually comes across really, really well in that first scene. So, I was very scared going into this film that it was going to be classic, corny, cheesy, overdone, and the reason I felt that was because I knew it was going to harken back to the original Top Gun, which was, of course, released at a very different time when Hollywood were churning out those kind of corny films. In the trailer, interactions between the rest of the pilots, and particularly Hangman, was sort of the reason for my worry for that. But actually, I found that I didn't care, and the reason I didn't care is because the plot itself was actually moving. I mean, the comeback to Top Gun is strong enough for Maverick in terms of, the emotive response it gives, and Tom Cruise does a really good job, actually, of displaying the joy he feels by being asked back. The revisit to Iceman's office is really where I noticed that this film was trying to do something different to the first one, because obviously, there is a sentimentality to having Val Kilmer in this film. He's suffering from illness, which thankfully he looks to be recovering from now. But in that scene, Val Kilmer can't speak because of, in the story, his throat cancer, which was written in, obviously, to accommodate for him. And it's a really, really touching scene where Tom Cruise essentially communicates with a computer, but Val Kilmer is present and he's the one typing these messages. And it becomes very clear that actually this film is asking you to revisit the characters rather than revisit the arena they are performing in. So that moment where we see Tom Cruise start to well up as Iceman helps him look deeper within inside himself and let go of the trauma of him having to face Goose's death from the first film, and tells him that this is a new project, this is a new idea, he's got to let himself move on from it, and this is now far more important, and it's a really, really moving scene. And one of the reasons it's so moving is because, as I kind of mentioned earlier, the central performance from Tom Cruise is actually one of my favourite Cruise performances in a very long time. He portrayed the differences between ecstasy, love, and loss brilliantly in this particular film. And we are with Tom Cruise for most of the film, and it's essentially following his journey, even though we are introduced to a whole host of new people. Miles Teller was excellent as always, and I actually really enjoy the supporting cast. I worried, having seen the pub scene and the trailer as well, that I thought they would be jarring and too much and too many people, and I wouldn't be able to get a sense of their characters. But I didn't think that. I thought that actually by the end, as a unit, they were functioning really well together, and the difference between the characters, which could have been very cliched, and maybe if you boil it down, is cliched, but actually, I thought all the characters were sort of flashed out enough for me to say, okay, I'm on board with this, and I really was just moved along with the story. I didn't feel like I was watching, a performance. I felt as if I was down there with them, making every turn. The romance between Tom Cruise and Jennifer Connelly is really strong. They do a really good job of that. Jon Hamm is brilliantly stoic. He plays his character perfectly. I love all of Jon Hamm's work. And it was obviously great to see Val Kilmer again, even though he wasn't speaking. The throwbacks are lovely. I mean, the particular one that stands out to me is the scene with the double American football game on the beach, echoing the volleyball antics of the first film, which became so famous. But also, I mean, obviously one of the key attractions of this film is the flying. The plane sequences themselves are actually excellent, and I didn't ever feel lost. Obviously the helmets were helpful because they've got people's names written on them, but I mean that's sort of an age you've got to allow the filmmakers to have in this, because otherwise it would be immensely difficult to sync up audio and visuals at exactly the same time and give the audience a real clear sense of where they are. The cinematography of Claudio Miranda is expertly done. The editing of Eddie Hamilton is really, really important, and I think the reason they play so well is because you're never actually in the flying scenes for too long. There's a sort of crescendo towards obviously the final mission, which takes place, sort of a large section of the third act is the mission and the fallout from it. But actually, I don't think you're ever in the plane for too long in the run up to it. You breathe and you cool down along with the pilots. As they get out, you get out. And I suppose that's why I was sort of so moved by this film, is because I was actually properly taken on the journey with them. I didn't feel like it was all about the planes or all about the action. I actually felt like this was a scenario that characters we were showed and were fleshed out, were being taken on this journey with us. When you ask most people what they like about films, if you say, what do you like most about Star Wars, they'll say the lightsaber fights, or what do you like most about Kill Bill, they'll say the fighting scenes. But that isn't really what you like. What you like is that is happening surrounded by a story and a bunch of characters that you care about, that you really invest in, and that makes those moments have more weight. This film is the primary example of that. The original Top Gun is great, and it is iconic because of, everything it gave us, including the slightly cheesy music, but we'll look past that. Top Gun did focus too much on the planes in the first film, and the romance was so sort of corny and dialed up that it really didn't feel like it was what the film was asking us to care about. What the film was asking us to care about was, of course, all the pilot sequences, whereas this surrounds them with a bunch of story that actually means something, and I'm not ashamed to say that by the end of it, I did shed a tear when the end of the film, I'll try not to spoil it too much, but the end of the film occurred. I was genuinely crying tears of joy. It was a really, really lovely experience, and I really recommend that you see this film because it is still in cinemas. It's out everywhere, so if you can get a chance, do see this film. I really, really recommend it. Okay, so on to Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness then. This was directed, of course, by Sam Raimi, very famous director who did the original Spider-Man trilogy and had the debacle with the Evil Dead, the video nasties back in the day. It's written by Michael Waldron, who did a lot of work on Rick and Morty and Loki. All-star cast: Benedict Cumberbatch, Elizabeth Olsen, Shotil Gomez, Chiwetel Ejiofor, Rachel McAdams, and Benedict Wong. This film could have been so much more than it is, but I'm afraid it lets itself down. So the story is this: Doctor Strange has to fix the cracks that he made in the multiverse by saving Spider-Man in No Way Home, and now Xochitl Gomez's character, America Chavez, finds herself able to walk through these universes, though not at will. Wanda sees that she has this power and is besotted on attaining it so that she may visit her children in a different universe, so she goes a bit mental, and as a result, Strange and Wanda start exploring multiple universes in which they have to achieve their own goals. Wanda's to acquire this power and see her children, and Strange to protect America Chavez and stop the Scarlet Witch. So, first of all, it is important to note that there are Sam Raimi fingerprints on this, in his wonderfully weird way. The horror elements are exaggerated, and at times the Scarlet Witch sequences are genuinely scary, and I think Elizabeth Olsen is the standout part of this film. I think she's absolutely excellent. She turns her hand at both characters really well, from one emotion to the next. She is excellent. The story, however, is not. My main problem with the whole story is this: the effort it took to include Xochitl Gomez's character is exhausting. It's really, really challenging to invest in her story because it is a terrible character who is completely bereft of any personality. The film cannot tell if she is alternative, if she resents the main characters, or if she really needs them. And actually, Xochitl Gomez's performance is really dull, and she becomes an integral part of the narrative, and that becomes really, really tricky to move the story on in a way that's really engaging, because I can't find myself siding with this primary character. If she gets her own film as America Chavez, it will be absolutely fuming because she was so unlikable in this film. There was just no substance to her. The film did what a lot of films do, which really upsets me, and the main culprit of this, I remember, is Suicide Squad. I could go into a rant on this film for ages, but about halfway through, Will Smith's character refers to the group as if they are a family and expects the audience to sort of unite behind them and view them as this brilliant unit that are working so harmoniously together that we really care about, and they're really special and they deserve our attention, they deserve status, and the film has done nothing to deserve that. It's the same with this. At one point, Strange says that this kid is special and that, you know, he's proud of her or whatever, and she is special in the sense that she has this power, but what she's not special is in demonstrating any kind of bravery, any kind of character, any kind of resilience. There's nothing to say that this character is actually worth the salt or the praise that she's been given, and that really frustrates me because it means that an integral part of this film I just can't invest in. The maternal instincts in Vision are another thing that I find a bit weird. They're so strong that she is willing to murder thousands of people and tear the universe apart in order to move into the body of a version of herself which has children. Now, Olsen plays that exceptionally convincingly. She's very good at switching from one emotion to the other, from sadness to joy, from anger to ecstasy. She is very moving, but that plotline is intensely difficult to believe because there are several instances where you just want to grab her by the shoulders and shake her and say, stop ruining the universe. I understand that this is Scarlet Witch, but it just felt like a very odd turn to take. The CGI was pretty good, and that was one thing that was going to be quite prominent in this film, was the effects. They had fun with it, which I'm glad about, because it really did look pretty cool at times, even for a Marvel film. These weren't good Marvel effects, these were good effects. But it didn't really aid the story at any point. That's what kind of annoyed me about it, because the last act of the film was its best, because it had progression using the special effects, which the rest of the film did not. I mean, that big one-eyed alien squid monster at the start did absolutely nothing, really, to advance the plot. The rest was essentially different magic battles occurring in different arenas, and while that can be fun to watch, it didn't really feel like it had any substance to it. The film wastes a lot of characters in the alternate dimension scene. Again, it was fun, but any film that wastes Chiwetel Ejiofor makes me very angry. Also, his universe is absolutely decimated by Scarlet Witch in terms of its superhero makeup. But all of them are gone, and the film just glosses over the fact that it ruins several universes. But it's not our one, so we don't care. We're just not going to address that. The sequence with, once again, spoiler alert, Patty LeStew, or Patrick Stewart if you're a normal person, is like that bit in Deadpool 2 when he has that group of superheroes that one by one just get picked off in a very, very funny manner, except in Doctor Strange and Multiverse of Madness, the film isn't joking. It goes, here's Lashana Lynch, and then she's dead, and then it goes, here's John Krasinski, and then he's dead, and then it goes, here's Patrick Stewart, and then he's dead. It was pointless cameos for the sake of cameos. I would have loved them to have advanced the plot, but all they did was give expositional dumps and then piss off. The score by Danny Elfman is uninspiring. The editing by Bob Murawski and Tia Nolan and the cinematography by Jon Miteson, it's not as wild as it could have been, and that's one of my main frustrations. That scene in the trailer looked really intriguing where Stranger's moving through the different universes and his face sort of pixelates and moves and shifts, and that looked really intriguing and really different and alternative, and it looked like it was going to be a fresh take on the multiverse idea in which they were going to really mess around with effects and cinematography and editing and sort of discombobulate us, which would have been really nice. I worry how much Sam Raimi was actually held in by Marvel. It needed to not be that. It needed to be weirder. It needed to be more of him. And he has proved time and time again. He directed Spider-Man 2, which is the best Spider-Man film outright. It could have been so much more adventurous, but it wasn't. It was played very safe, and despite the fact that they did deal with different universes and alternate dimensions, and Scarlet Witch went mad to a level we've never seen before, a lot of it just felt superficial. The Christine storyline felt genuinely buried under the rest of the rubbish that was surrounding it. There were too many plot points happening at the same time which weren't connected, which we were supposed to be taken along with at the same pace, that we just weren't. And it's a shame because I love Benedict Cumberbatch, I love Elizabeth Olsen, I love Sam Raimi, I love Chiwetel Ejiofor. This film didn't service that at all. 5 out of 10, to be honest, if I was going to have to rate it, because it could have been a lot more, it could have been a lot better, but I'm afraid it wasn't, and for me, it's a bit of a letdown. So moving on to Operation Mincemeat then, this was directed by John Madden, the man behind Shakespeare in Love, Debt, and the Best Exotic Marigold Hotel films, I'm a big fan of. It was written by Michelle Ashford, and if you can think of any British actor pretty much, they're basically in it. We're only missing the mighty Mr. Broadbent himself, who managed to somehow miss the memo on getting this script, but it's Colin Firth, Matthew McFadden, Kelly MacDonald, Penelope Wilton, Johnny Flynn, Jason Isaacs, Mark Gatiss, Alex Jennings, Simon Russell Beale. They're all there in a really smooth ensemble cast, actually. I thought they worked really well together throughout the whole film, so that's a big plus. The story is the British need to move Nazi attention away from an attack they promised to the Americans in Sicily. They want to trick the Nazis into thinking that an invasion will take place in Greece, and so Ewan Montague, Colin Firth, a Jewish lawyer whose wife's gone to America with the children for safety, unites with Charles Cholmondeley, played by Matthew McFadden, which looks like it should be spelled Cholmondeley, but there we go, there's a wonder of the British language. They're going to use a trick involving a dead corpse carrying fake documents washing up on the Spanish coast to trick the Nazis. I like this film. It's a really interesting and intriguing story. Obviously, we know it didn't win the war. That can't ever be the end of it because it happened in 1943. But it's a fun story to tell. And it's a really cosy take on it. And I think that reason I call it cosy is actually down to the lighting. The lighting's often very yellow and orange, and rather than being white or very dark, it's not harsh, it's warm. It's aiding the story, and it's aiding the sort of ability we have to emotionally connect with these characters and see their interactions with one another. This film suffers a little bit from not knowing if it's going to focus on the operation itself or the characters within it, which sometimes get in the way of each other. There's a bit of a clash. The first act moves at a brilliant pace. It's almost breakneck, but never in a way which leaves you behind. It takes you with it the whole time. I like that the film slows down a bit towards the end, because it sort of mirrors the slowing down of the operation itself and the frustration that came with that. It's all very gung-ho at the start when the operation gets the go-ahead, but from there it cools down as the mission progresses and the details get more intricate. The script I actually thought was pretty good in terms of servicing the characters and allowing them their own personalities, which were all very distinct. I just don't think the balance was quite right between the character interactions and the story, which is why at the moment when they came to blows near in the final act, Colin Firth and Matthew McFadden, it felt a little bit odd and out of place. It looked really good. The production design fit the time period very well, and as I said, the lighting's brilliant, and I actually think the costumes have worked really well as well. Jason Isaacs is classic Isaacs, and he's very good at it. There's not much more to say about him than that. Some moments are slightly glossed over, though, which is one of my problems with this film. It likes to not really take an interest in the backgrounds of these characters, or not really take an interest in the other goings-on around them. And my main example of that is Mark Gatiss as Ivor being potentially a Russian spy and being watched by Cholmondeley isn't really explored enough. There's a sort of about 30 seconds of it. I mean, it's mentioned a couple of times, but it's only really shown for that amount of time. There's a very intriguing performance of Churchill from Simon Russell Beale, and when he's introduced, that's the moment when Armando Iannucci must have done his best Leo DiCaprio pointing at the TV impression, as the cast of Death of Stalin all just decided to join the Allied powers just for the crack. It's a Churchill which fits the story, but it's not caricatured, it's frustrated and hardline, and it's not actually that Churchill-y. It doesn't sound like what we know to be the voice of Churchill, but it strangely fits the narrative. It was lovely to see Paul Ritter giving a great performance. He's a really lively presence in it, and it's a very sad loss. I think the story is cleverly told. It's told humanely, it's told using character interaction, which I think is probably the best way to tell a story. I just think sometimes the shifting of the plot suffers a little bit because of it. But I really think it's worth a watch. It's a great Sunday afternoon film. Cleverly told, good script, warm approach, worth a watch. So, onto a big one then, The Northman. Now, I debated giving this film its own podcast because I have a lot to say about it, but I thought I'd try and fit it into this and try and compact a little bit so I'm not just rambling on. It's directed by Robert Eggers, who did The Lighthouse and The Witch, two absolutely brilliant films, so it's no wonder that the hype was strong when this film was going to come out. It was written by Sean and Robert Eggers, Sean of Sean and Bjork fame. It was a really strong cast: Alexander Skarsgård, Anya Taylor-Joy, Nicole Kidman, Claes Bang, Ethan Hawke. Willem Dafoe's on the poster, but he's in it for about 45 seconds, so... The story is, in AD 895, King Arvandil, War Raven, returns to his kingdom on the island of Francais after his overseas conquest and is reunited with his wife, Queen Gudrun, and his son and heir, Prince Amleth, who is the character that the story centres around. From there, Arvandil and Amleth, father and son, take part in one of the weirdest rituals I've ever seen, involving releasing gas. That's all I'm going to say. And afterwards, the father is killed by his brother Fjolnir. Now, Amleth flees, swearing to avenge his father and save his mother, and he joins a clan of Vikings and is raised as a berserker, but turns himself into a slave in order that he may be sent to work under Fjolnir, who doesn't recognise him as an adult, and as a result, kill him and seek his revenge. Now, there are very, very many positives about this film. Number one, it looks absolutely spectacular. The cinematography by Darren Blaschke is superb. It's genuinely extraordinary, and I think it's sort of era-defining. It's true to its time. The research into ancient rituals, lifestyles, and spirits is exceptional. It feels like a transportation to the 9th century. It feels like an experiential film. Every scene looks brilliant, and it's unusual in the right Eggers way. It's gory, but it has his fingerprints all over it, and it's intriguing, and you want to follow it. And there's some brilliantly crafted one-shot set pieces, like the first village invasion. And the nighttime battle as well is fantastic. There's a lot of good in this film, and it has a lot of cinematic merit. However, it really annoys me, because the script actually is really bad. What it tries to do is be a sort of quasi-Shakespearean ensemble piece, but the problem is that it really isn't. It feels childish, and it's using the spirit of Nordic folklore. I know it's in that vein, like when the oracle says, son of Arvandil, instead of Amleth, which is his name. But it becomes expositional. It becomes cheap and easy. I think Eggers actually hoped he'd get away with that element of this film. And whilst everything looks fantastic and the attention to detail is world class, they've clearly done their homework. There isn't a lot of show don't tell. It feels all tell, and exposition in an Icelandic accent is still exposition to me. It actually took me out of the film because it made it less believable. My least favourite bit, without a shadow of a doubt, before the first titles have rolled, the son is rowing away from the island, screaming, I will avenge you, father, I will save you, mother, I will kill you, Fjolnir, over and over again. So, sorry, that's just for anyone in the back who wants to kill Fjolnir, avenge his dad, and save his mother. Like, I mean, come on. Give the audience their credit. They will work out what's going on. You don't have to have a child screaming that over and over and over again at the start of the film, which moves on to the point of the first section of the film being unbearable because the child actor who plays young Amleth is rubbish and annoying. And look, all he's doing is what's been given to him. It's not his fault. He's reading the lines from the script. He's using the direction from Robert Eggers. But it's awful. And it's slightly set a disappointing tone to the whole film for me. The film itself is too long. Like 45 minutes too long, at least. And the reason this is because the story moves at the Eggers pace in which The Witch and The Lighthouse did, except it has so much more to cover. There's a lot more ground to get through. It can't possibly succeed at that speed. And this is also because the film becomes indulgent for me. There's a lot of gore, and it becomes ridiculous. I don't mind a bit of gore at all. Gory films don't really bother me at all, and actually I think anyone who writes about them being responsible for various bits and pieces of horrors in society doesn't actually know what they're talking about. And it makes sense that there's gore in this film. It's accurate. But it becomes too much, and the time it becomes too much is at the Viking funeral, which again is true to its history, but it's gore for the sake of gore. The whole experience is meant to immerse us. I get it, and it does a good job, but it's just obvious how no one was there to stop Eggers and say, how about we focus on the story for now? And there I counted at least 7 beheadings, countless deaths, and absolutely no mercy. Having said this, there is still some good. The scene where the son meets Nicole Kidman again, and the kiss is fantastic. It's classic Eggers. It works a treat. It twists your insides perfectly, and it's absolutely the best conclusion to his family story, or the best revelation it could have been. I also had an issue with the score, because although the instrumentation is perfect, and again, detail is excellent, and a lot of people really love the score, the leading theme throughout the piece basically just sounds like Viva La Diva from Eurovision, except with a Nordic violin type instrument. So that was odd, but Alex Skarsgård is going to be a very strong shout for Best Actor. I know it's ridiculously early to be saying that, but I've got a strong suspicion he'll be amongst almost all the nominees, because he is brilliant in terms of approaching the character, and he's scary, and he's really done his homework, and it's a great performance. On the whole, it is worth watching, because it's a visual masterpiece, but it's problematic, it's too long and indulgent, and I really dislike films that become indulgent. That's why I have a problem with some of the Tarantino stuff. Django is one of my favourite films until the last 45 minutes, and the moment when Tarantino turns up is just a massive punch in the gut, and it feels like we've been trudging through this whole film, and we've been taken along with it, and we've been moved and scared and shocked, and finally we're coming to the end, we're coming to the great conclusion of the story, and then he comes and does a horrible Australian accent in it and ruins the whole thing. Well, it doesn't ruin the whole thing, but you know what I mean, it ruins the immersion for you. Anyway, Eggers needed to rein this in a bit, and that's its problem, but I would definitely recommend you see it while you can. Now then, Morbius! And that is about as much enthusiasm as you're going to get. Directed by Daniel Espinosa, who did Child 44 and Safe House. You know those films, you remember them, Child 44 and Safe House? No, me neither. It was written by Matt Sazma and Burke Sharpless, who wrote Gods of Egypt. That tells you everything you need to know. Who, for the love of God, at Sony decided that this ensemble would result in anything other than the pile of garbage that this film is. Cast: Jared Leto, Matt Smith, Jared Harris, Adria Arjona, Al Madrigal and Tyrese Gibson. Where do I even start? First off, Jared Leto is an executive producer on this film, so imagine my surprise when it's a piece centred around himself mucking around as a vampire containing absolutely no substance whatsoever. It is utterly ridiculous. All of it. The story is quite literally the most awful and rehashed thing I've ever seen. It's astonishingly weak. The writing and the script must have been made by a child, and if one more American film or series does bullying in the most pathetic GCSE drama way possible, in a way that no one is ever bullied, if any of them do that again, looking at you, Stranger Things, then I'm going to vomit. Stop being tragic at portraying bullying. It's really not hard to do it properly without making me want to be sick in my eyes. Mark Kermode calls this a spider-adjacent origin story that no one asked for, and he's spot on. No one wanted this film. But here's the story. Dr. Michael Morbius has a blood disease that is immensely debilitating, and he decides to, as a medical genius, go to a cave in a remote location in which he will capture bats and use their DNA to help cure his blood disease. His friend from his children's ward growing up, Matt Smith, has the same illness. Dr. Morbius turns into a vampire, goes on a killing spree, and then realizes that what he is doing is no good, and he's going to have to try and use fake blood to sustain himself, but that will only work for so long. He doesn't know what to do, and Matt Smith takes the injection, takes the cure, and becomes the same vampire type character as him, except in an evil version, and gets to do all of the fun stuff. Matt Smith steals the film and is the best thing about it by a long way. That's because he's Matt Smith, and he's never bad yet. Jared Harris is good in it, which means that Jared Leto is not even the best Jared in the film, because he's completely outdone by Jared Harris. Leto is completely void of any emotion. He cannot be a superhero, apart from that superb work as Super Mario in the House of Gucci, and everyone's bored of him. I cannot, for the life of me, wonder why anyone was calling out for a film starring Jared Leto as a vampire. It just sounds like the greatest combination for garbage there is. And lo and behold, here we are. His performance is so empty, so dry, that it's impossible to care about him at all. Jared Leto has two modes of acting. Number one, woo! Woo! Number two, oh my god, what's the matter with me? I'm like so different to everyone else. This is madness. Like, come on! Stop wasting everyone's time. It looks alright, the film, but that's because it's backed by an $80 million budget, for crying out loud. No one wanted this, no one asked for it. The film was thinking more about the trailer than it was about the film, right? Jared Leto must have been thinking he was going to do the voiceover for the trailer, and he was going to say something stupid like, "This spring, Jared Leto is Dr. Michael Morbius. There's vampires. Oh my god, look, he's a vampire. Isn't it amazing? He's a vampire. Matt Smith uses a walking stick and gives a speech. Jared Leto flies around in front of a subway train. Look, he has superpowers. Why don't you want to watch this film?" It's utter garbage, it's arse gravy, it's completely ridiculous, and if I see Jared Leto in another film in the next 5 years that wins awards, I'm going to buy every copy of the DVD there is, fly to his house, and eat every single one in front of him. And then they have to somehow try and make it seem like it was worth it by giving you a final end credit scene in which they bring back one of the greatest things about the new Marvel era Spider-Man, spoiler here, Michael Keaton, and making him talk to Morbius. For God's sake, don't watch this film, because all the memes about it and all the attention it's getting mean that they'll make another one and I'll die. I will just combust, because the fact that Jared Leto may be given another £80 million budget on a film which is utter garbage is insulting to me as a film viewer. So the quicker this dies, the better. Don't watch Morbius, don't waste your time. Here's all the information you need to know. Matt Smith dies, Jared Leto does not. I wish it was the other way around. And he tells Michael Keaton's Vulture that there is a job that needs doing involving Spider-Man. That is all you need to know about this film, and it could have been summed up in a 30-second clip without having to watch the man with the hair that's too long babble on about being a bat for 1 hour and 40 minutes. Right, I'm sorry about that, but I genuinely couldn't contain myself. So, those are some reviews of recent films that have come out. Some still in cinemas, as I say, some are beginning to come out on streaming platforms. So, if you do fancy giving any of those a watch, then do. I would recommend The Northman and Operation Mincemeat and Top Gun Maverick as the three main ones to watch. The other two you can sort of give a bit of a miss. There's lots of other films that are coming out soon, which I will be looking to go and see and then come back and hopefully talk about on here. But in the meantime, I would like to thank you very much for downloading this podcast. If you do have any feedback, if you liked hearing me rant, if you hated hearing me rant, if you thought this was a slightly odd format, please let me know. It's at Bajoria Dom on Twitter, because someone took Dom Bajoria. Thank you very much for downloading, and I will see you next week. Bye!